Hello and welcome to the RCR Wireless News webinar today, dealing with content anywhere, anytime, any device. I'm your moderator, Kelly Hill, technology reporter for RCR Wireless News. And I'd like to welcome our participants today, Patrick Lopez, CEO and founder of Core Analysis. We also have Sudeep Bose, Segment Strategy and Business Development Manager from Tektronix, as well as Matt Goldberg, Senior Director of Service Provider Solutions at Sev1. Welcome, gentlemen, and let's go ahead and get started. I just wanted to start off by mentioning a few things. We recently had the Consumer Electronics Show, and there was a lot of news that has to do with content delivery. We had Verizon announcing that it will launch a mobile-first video service in the second half of this year. We've had AT&T demonstrating its LTE broadcast, or eMBMS, at the National Football Playoff Championship at AT&T Stadium. Verizon was testing its LTE broadcast in this past year. And then we also had Verizon Wireless just in the last couple of days announced that it will be offering a connected car subscription service, a Verizon vehicle. There was also some attention during CES on Qualcomm and what it sees as movement toward multi-user MIMO for Wi-Fi, and with Wi-Fi being one of the primary access technologies for getting content, that's also relevant in terms of speeding up and making Wi-Fi more efficient. And then we also had Ericsson and T-Mobile US talking about trialing LTE unlicensed and small cells this year through license-assisted access. And that's just another evolution of these LTE networks that is moving forward in terms of people being able to access more mobile content. So our Content Anywhere report is available today on rcrwireless.com. It's already up. You can download it off of the website. Here are some of the key takeaways from that report. Consumers are driving a huge shift in content consumption. We're really starting to see video moving onto mobile networks on smartphones and tablets. That's a shift that's been going on for a while, but I think there's some pretty amazing statistics out there right now in terms of how that usage is growing. We're also seeing networks being impacted by a series of trends that include the growth of content delivery networks, the cloud, and speeds on both wireline and wireless networks that are really making this experience more enjoyable so that people want to do things like watch more video. Consumers have more choices. Operators need to have the systems in place to both support a wide range of options as well as to market those choices, and flexible systems are definitely the name of the game going forward. We're seeing a lot of new and interesting partnerships when it comes to content, and the systems have to be in place to support those. So again, that report is available for download at rcrwireless.com. Now I would like to turn to our analyst, Patrick, and he's going to be giving us a look into some of the trends that are going on in the ecosystem. Patrick?
Thanks a lot, Kelly. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're dialing from. And thanks, Kelly, for the introduction. If we can go to the next slide, please. So a short overview about what I do. I'm the founder and CEO of Core Analysis, which is an analyst practice that is focused specifically on traffic management and OTT video. And I'm going to present a few trends today to set the stage for our discussions later on with our further panelists. So if we can go to the next slide, please, and go through the first animation. Yes. So why are we here? I think one of the prevalent trends that underlines the content anywhere market is the fact that we now have ubiquitous fixed and mobile broadband. 70% of US households are connected to fixed broadband, and we have at the latest number over 100 million LTE subscriptions in the US. If we couple that with the fact that we have increasingly a large number of smart devices that are connected to fixed and wireless networks. So we have over 150 million smartphones in North America, and more than a third of adults own a tablet today. grouped with the fact that increasingly we have more and more devices that are connected, and we have TVs, video game consoles, but also sticks from Roku or from Amazon, for instance. And Kelly mentioned also the fact that more and more cars are going to be connected in the near future. All that conspires to basically create the market for OTT, over-the-top content. And if we go to the next slide, please. Basically, I'd like to look at how the value chain is articulated or has been articulated until now, in order to understand why this content is exploding and why content everywhere is an interesting trend. You are familiar with the pay TV model, where basically you have a cable or satellite provider that is selecting a number of packages of TV channels. Those channels are selecting a number of studios in order to provide them with content. And if we look at pay TV as a market today, it's about $400 billion of revenue that is shared about one-third between the MSO, the TV channel, and the studio, the content provider. That revenue is coming from advertising, from pay TV services and subscription, such as video on demand and public broadcast. If we go to the next slide, please. As we can see, last year, OTT video created about $10.3 billion worth of revenue, so it's much smaller than pay TV for sure. But I think the main important point here is that that revenue was shared 40% to 60% between the TV channel, or rather the content aggregator, and the studio, or the content provider. And what it means is basically that content is now king. If we go to the next slide. In the traditional content delivery value chain, content was selected by a channel, which was selected by an MSO, and basically the MSO was the one that had the power in the value chain, in the sense that being able to select the content and to create the channel lineup, and the channels themselves being able to select the content and decide when this content would be aired, basically decided the popularity of that content, and the subscriber decided whether they wanted to subscribe to an MSO or another, or channel or another. Nowadays, it's a completely different value chain. I call it a valued circle, where basically the consumer is controlled. Consumer has the capacity to decide whether to look at the content from their traditional provider on a TV subscription service, or accessing this content directly in broadband over the top, either through a website directly at the content provider, or at a content aggregator such as Netflix. And this is really a revolution, in the sense that providing the control to the consumer changes completely how consumption habits evolve over time. If we go to the next slide. And basically, this new consumer behavior dictates new strategies, as both on the MSO side and on the OTT front, content providers, aggregators, and delivery networks are repositioning themselves in order to take opportunity of this new market segment. So MSOs traditionally have been looking at vertical integration, therefore being able to group not only the content delivery together with the content. So you have seen, I'm from Canada, in Canada, moves from the leaders in our market space, Bell and Rogers, for instance, to acquire sports team, hockey teams, and it's not really for the sports itself. It's just that acquiring licenses and acquiring sports team provide them with exclusive or preferential access to premium content. And of course, in Canada, if you don't have hockey, you don't, well, you're nowhere in terms of providing content. So that's one strategy that we have seen being fairly successful. We've seen a lot of content providers, or rather MSOs, starting into the multi-screen play themselves, offering their content not only through the traditional TV broadcast, but also online by providing a web interface for users to access through their desktop or their tablet, and just entering the credentials that they have today in terms of their cable or satellite credential. And we've seen also some of them starting to move away from the pay TV model and go OTT themselves. And as an example, we've seen HBO, who was traditionally a channel that was packaged within cable and satellite subscription, is now breaking away, and on top of this model is offering HBO Go directly to broadband subscribers, in some case packaged within subscribers subscription, but not cable subscription, broadband subscription. On the OTT front, as I mentioned, content is king, so actually having access to content and exclusivity of content becomes paramount, and we'll see that in a few seconds. And they also are trying to basically own the network in the sense of owning their own CDNs so that they can guarantee quality of service. And we'll see some of the panelists later on in a few minutes explain why having a good quality of experience becomes a key differentiator in delivering content anywhere. And you see here on that slide an example of Netflix spending $90 million, probably one of the most expensive TV show produced ever, with the new series Marco Polo. We all have followed the success of Netflix with its House of Cards. It has become clear that having a content that is differentiating and that is exclusive to an OTT provider becomes a real differentiator. Next slide, please. We spoke about devices and their proliferation. I think it's important to understand that devices are evolving over time, and we are now seeing the first 4K devices arriving on mobile networks and on Wi-Fi. And those 4K devices can play 4K content, but they also have 4K cameras that allow them to capture 4K content and to upload it. So it puts, of course, a huge strain on networks, whether mobile or fixed, as they have to accommodate the surge in terms of traffic. And again, it becomes a real challenge to manage the user experience when networks become very congested. Next slide. At the same time, we're seeing OTTs providers that have traditionally provided either free-to-air services, such as YouTube, or services based on subscription on a flat fee, evolving their pricing structure. So YouTube is now looking at providing paid subscription and paid channel, premium channels. At the same time, Netflix is starting to raise their price for 4K streaming and providing different shaded pricing depending on whether you're watching Netflix on your TV, on your laptop, or on your tablet, and whether you're watching it on HD or SD. Next slide, please. And we are seeing also new initiatives from a network perspective in order to provide even more ubiquitous broadband coverage. And we have seen Google, for instance, with their Loon project, making some good inroads with content providers and with network operators and MSOs, particularly in Australia, but also in South America, to provide the infrastructure to connect really emerging market and the next billion of connected devices and of connected households, because it is likely that in emerging market access to internet and broadband will be wireless first, being able to have new solutions to connect as many people as possible becomes really paramount. Next slide, please. One of the elements that is missing today is really advertising. We have seen for the first time last year digital advertising, so online advertising, becoming for the first time more important than broadcast TV in terms of investment, but mobile remains a very small part of it, and that will have to be solved if we want to create an ecosystem that is profitable for all parties involved. Today, we are seeing OTT content providers, network operators, in some cases cooperate, but in many cases in a fairly adversarial position because the value chain around mobile advertising is not yet consolidated. And that will be one of the key success factors in the future if we want that business to be profitable. Next slide, please. So that's it at a high level. This is my overview of the main challenges associated with content everywhere, as well as the main opportunities. And we're going to hear now from the next panelists in terms of their perspective on how that increases over time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Patrick. And we are going to be moving on to Sudeep Bose of Tektronix. Sudeep?
Good morning and afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. I'm going to kind of talk about the same content, same topic, but from a slightly different perspective. Patrick talked to us about what's really happening in the trends, and I want to talk about kind of the technology and the pitfalls that are behind all of this, all of the supporting services and technologies that support these trends. Next slide, please. So if you look at one of these ways of providing these services is being able to use something called adaptive bitrate technologies to deliver content, and this has really been done and evolved over the last 5 odd years since the beginning of streaming video started, to be able to get over the concept of being able to deliver something like video, which really required a walled garden kind of contained, maintained network to deliver it, to now trying to deliver it over a best effort network, i.e. delivering it over the internet, where a large chunk of that pathway is really kind of unknown or uncontrolled by the service provider, right? So in this particular workflow, for instance, we kind of talk about what is done to the media content right from the point it's ingested in through transcoding and then fragmentation, DRM, and then through the transmission, quote-unquote transmission network of actually getting it out on the origin service and then going into the CDN where it's cached at the edge caches and such, right? And load balancers in the middle. The point being, there's a lot that can go wrong in all of this. But the fact that becomes even more important in all of this is what Patrick alluded to earlier, which is content ends up really becoming the stronger and stronger point, right? As you saw in Patrick's presentation, what's ended up happening is people who own the content are becoming more and more prevalent in bigger value in the value chain, and the delivery mechanism, which so far was kind of a third, right, is becoming something where people who are delivering, who own the content, are now saying, hey, I can also deliver this content because I've got a way of getting it out there. True, but it also has its own challenges to deal with it. So, but what becomes clear in all of this is that content is really what's going to drive it. That's what's going to drive whether a viewer is going to become a subscriber of that service that you're offering. You've got to have compelling content, right? And compelling content is also from a perspective of how compelling the programming itself is, and also the experience of the viewer as they are viewing that programming. So quality of experience and quality of the service becomes even more important, because also because the competition is going to increase significantly, right? So, previously where you only had your cable company potentially as the only video service provider for you, now then you had your DirecTV or Dish Network or direct-to-home type provider, and then came the IPTV service providers, and now this is opening up to even more and more such service providers, right? So ensuring that the content is compelling and ensuring that experience of viewing that content is the best that's out there is going to be very important to be able to attract and retain the subscribers. So as you can see in this rather busy slide, there's a lot that can happen. There's a lot that does happen in such a workflow, and there's a lot that can go wrong right from the first point of the actual content coming in and understanding the quality of that content, because as we all know, garbage in, garbage out, right? So that content that's coming into this workflow has to be of the highest quality, and such that any of the variants that are created from it that are then transcoded and fragmented and then sent further downstream is of high quality as well, right? So it's imperative to start with content that is of very high quality, and so you've got to make sure that you benchmark the content up front, and if there are issues with it, you identify that early and up front and get that fixed before it's too late. And of course, with any of these services, there ends up being two variants: a on-demand type service, but also it's becoming more and more probable and possible to be able to actually deliver these in real time, right? So as we have seen, ESPN was showing the World Cup in real time over their ESPN mobile sites, and those kind of services become very important as well. But it's in those cases, it's important to understand how that content's coming in. If there's an issue, you can't really fix it before it goes live because it is live content, but you ought to be able to very quickly go back to the content provider and report any issues and get their help in fixing them. So that first point of the content that's getting ingested in becomes even more important, even more important than what we have known them to be in traditional linear services. And then as we move forward, that's where all the newer areas around this new technology comes into play, with fragmenting the content and then being able to put the encryption and such in, and being able to then carry it through relatively technologies that are around HTTP service or HTTP services then comes into play, right? So there are quality of service issues that can happen at every single point. So it becomes very, very important to be meticulous about every single, not just the network elements that are there, but the content that's flowing through those network elements, and keeping that going on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. So, just to highlight that point about the content, in this particular example, for instance, right, you see content, and there are artistic things being done, whereas there are issues being created by the active network elements, right? So in the lower image, you see that the blurred background is an artistic element of the content. So that's something that's been done by the people who are creating the content, and so there's not much you can do. But the top image shows how a transcoder encode process in this workflow is causing issues because the picture is getting overcompressed, and as such causing the visual artifacts that you see in that top. So it's very important to be able to distinguish between the two and be able to catch one and act upon it, whereas and not worry about the others and chase false positives. Given the volume of the content that's going to be going through these networks, it's going to be very important to be able to catch those ones that you can do something about quickly, and ignore the ones that are not to be bothered with. Next slide, please. So it just further validation of being able to understand pre and post transcode issues, and be able to see how that very important step can potentially affect your content quality, and be able to see what benchmark a pre-transcode and be able to see what those what the post-transcode quality is, and be able to see whether you're negatively affecting the quality of the content as you go through that step. I think that's the end of my rather brief discussion on this topic. So I'll go on to the next presenter, and then we can pick up any questions at the end.
Yes, please, audience, if you have questions as we go along, go ahead and submit those. We are going to be having a Q&A session at the end as soon as we get through Matt's presentation, and we'd love to answer your questions. So with that, Matt Goldberg from Sev1.
Thanks, Kelly. Can you flip to the next slide?
Sure.
Awesome, thanks. So, if we take a step back and certainly, keep kind of with the same methodology and ideas that both Patrick and Sandeep have been talking about, we really look at, what's going on today in the market and really like everyday life. I mean, when you start thinking about as you're, out and about during the day, we're now a very application-centric society where all these applications are driving massive volumes of data. Whether you're streaming video to your mobile device in your house or out on the road, you want that same consistent quality of service regardless of where you are. What this is really doing from a provider perspective is really driving that data increase, and it's making it more and more difficult to ensure that quality down to the end user. So as you're looking at content, you need to ensure that regardless of where it's coming from and who's consuming it, wherever they are, kind of with this ubiquitous roaming, whether you're home, work, on the road, you want to make sure that your content's available all the time to you. Next slide, please. If you look at it, user expectations, from a consumer perspective is that it's always on and it's always available. So, you start looking at different apps and how you can consume them and the different ways of actually consuming data. Patrick certainly talked earlier about, you have your Amazon Fire Sticks and Roku, and you've got all these streaming services. Apple certainly has the Apple TV, where you start streaming videos from Apple, but then, certainly we've seen as they've evolved the Apple TV platform, what they've done is add more and more applications. I know you turn on a Samsung TV, and they were even talking about it at CES. Their app store, so to say, is growing very rapidly for different content providers to push content directly to the televisions. We're starting to see content providers, if you take someone like an HBO as an example, where they have the ability now to provide just streaming content. You actually don't even have to subscribe to your cable operator. So not being able to access these things is now becoming an issue for end users, and when they can't access it, they think there's something wrong with the network, or my phone's not working, or my tablet's not working, or I can't get the app to load, watch ESPN, or whatever the particular case may be. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I talk about regularly and we see out in the industry is, to understand the end user experience, you really need to follow the data from wherever it's going from and going to. So if we take this, extremely high level diagram of an infrastructure, if you're looking at it from a mobility perspective, you're traversing a lot of different data centers. Probably the content is coming from a CDN or from a cloud-based service, and then it's got to go through your entire mobile infrastructure. So, regardless of who your carrier is, they're trying to take that content and push it as close to the end consumer, or have the internet access, if you're going out to the internet, as close to the end consumer as possible. So one of the great things to do, and Sandeep mentioned this, you want to test this data path, right, that the consumers are taking, so that you understand exactly what is the end user experience like, and how is different content affected differently, whether you're Netflix or Hulu, or you're streaming ABC or NBC. Are you a subscriber to one MSO or another MSO? So these are the types of things where understanding where the end user is and where the content's coming from really becomes extremely important, and it's really providing that visibility into it and being able to gather the data on what they're experiencing, and then figuring out where in that data path the problem persists. You can go to the next slide, please. when we start looking at, reports and trying to understand what is that like, we really want to understand, is it an application issue? Is it a network issue? Is it an end device issue? So, where in that service delivery path, as we start moving to, these, everything's becoming software defined everything, so to say. So it's going to become more and more complex as time goes on. What are the different things you need to look at and where they're going to? Are they going to a cloud-based service, like a Salesforce.com, or are they going to Google, or are they going to Facebook, or are they going to, a Netflix or a Hulu, and how do you understand, the path that data takes, and then what is the response of that data, of the data that's going across that path? So thank you very much. I think, Kelly, you're going to open it up for some questions, but I'll let you drive that part of it.
Yes, thank you, Matt. All right, folks. Well, please go ahead and submit any questions that you have. I am going to start us off with a few. We did have one question come in about what does MSO stand for. We are an acronym-heavy industry. MSO is multiple system operator, usually associated with cable companies. So let's make sure we have that terminology right. For my panelists, I'd like to get your thoughts on how the move to all IP networks has affected content delivery. And Patrick, you mentioned in your presentation that the prevalence of broadband has really is really a factor here. And I'm curious as to the perspective of you folks on how all IP is affecting the ecosystem.
Of course. Maybe I'll start. I think that you have we have lived through a revolution in the sense that networks have transitioned completely, almost, from analog to digital, and the fact that traffic, particularly in wireless network, is now or is about to be all IP, creates a lot of opportunities as well as risks for all involved. Specifically, we're looking now at mobile networks that where even the voice traffic will be transported in the future as an IP traffic with VoLTE, voice over LTE. And we're seeing the standards for LTE, LTE Advanced, and even 5G providing more and more opportunities and mechanisms to transport a lot of the traffic that we were talking about. Specifically, for instance, there is in LTE and LTE Advanced technology called LTE Broadcast or LTE Multicast, and you have mentioned, Kelly, implementations that are being ongoing and trials and demonstrations that have taken place for LTE broadcast. So that's one of the services that is going to be launched commercially in 2015 that allows for the broadcast of video content to specific areas and specific cells, allowing basically to provide high quality content in terms of the quality of transmission to a large number of people without having serious effect on the network from a load perspective. Mm-hmm. Obviously, providing content over the internet and the ubiquitousness of the penetration of internet devices as well as mobile and fixed broadband has accelerated that trend.
Okay. Sudeep, do you have thoughts on this transformation toward all IP?
Yeah, it's interesting and important to note that the transition to IP networks is something that has benefited and affected all parts of the value chain that Patrick showed early on, right? From the content creators, / studios to the broadcasters, all the way through the MSOs and such, right? What all of them used to use fairly point-to-point kind of physical layer mechanisms to even move their content around internally as recently as a decade ago, right? And over the last decade, all of that's changing to take advantage of IP infrastructure, even internally, even within their own facilities, and also to move content from event sites to their studios and such, right? So I think that transition to IP is affecting that value chain end to end, and of course now we are seeing that positively affecting the actual distribution all the way to the subscribers. So it's been a great change, and it's a catalyst for a lot of the changes that are happening. Of course, as with any change, there's lots of challenges that come with it, and every one of us involved in this ecosystem, we're all working feverishly to try to make this really work properly. Because there's a lot of benefits to everyone that come out of it.
Okay, Matt, thoughts?
Yeah, I think certainly as we move to all IP, one of the things that we're certainly seeing out in the industry right now is carriers are taking a really close look at capacity. Certainly, especially in that last mile, whether it be the fixed or the mobile side. In a lot of cases, certainly in the MSO space, we see upstream and downstream not necessarily from a capacity perspective matching equally. I think that's certainly something that everyone's been kind of paying attention to. And being able to understand where, from a capacity perspective, that last mile, especially I think with the spectrum crunch that we're seeing on the mobility side, is one of the things that's highlighting part of the issues that we've been talking about: LTE, LTE Advanced, 5G. Certainly, as we start rolling down those technologies, and you look at the number of radio frequencies that a single phone's going to have, it's going to be pretty intense. And I think depending how far away you are from particular sites, is going to depend on what frequency you use. And we already see it today where, if you're in a very densely populated area, the throughput speeds that you get are very, very drastically from, certainly city to city, and even within a city, particular areas within a city. So I think, that last mile is going to become even more important as we go to all IP and start looking at things like VoLTE on the mobility side, certainly in addition to the content and the video that we have today.
It's interesting that you mentioned that upstream versus downstream. When I was talking to Qualcomm for this report, Peter Carson was talking about, when you talk about LTE and LTE Advanced and the uplink versus the downlink, he said that Category 10 is really going to be the first time that we've seen a significant improvement in LTE in terms of the uplink. A lot of the speeds have been focused on improving downlink speeds. And that's good. That might open up some new and different possibilities. I think Patrick mentioned that these phones and tablets don't just have the ability to play HD or 4K video, but they also have the ability to record, very, very high quality video as well, and upload that. So. I had a question. We have a question from the audience for Patrick, and the question is, what can you tell us about the new payment models between different operators in the context of new agreements or interconnections? And are there any specific countries that you would suggest for these types of agreements? So, Patrick, I know that you're based in Canada, and we've seen some moves from the operators up there. Where else are you seeing different kinds of partnerships that are going on and interconnects?
Okay, so we have to I think differentiate two different types of agreement or partnership. So we're seeing changes in terms of interconnect between network operators themselves, and we're seeing changes and partnerships between content providers, OTT, and network operators. For the latter, we're seeing actually a lot of partnerships taking place in emerging countries, where basically network operators have been able to strike a number of deals with mostly social media companies such as Facebook, or other OTT messaging like Snapchat, for instance, to provide very innovative pricing model when it comes to delivering content or delivering services to their subscriber, where, for instance, in India, you have Uninor, which is the Telenor Group subsidiary in India, who has launched services where subscriber can buy 1 hour or 1 day or 1 week of Facebook usage, for instance, because, well, they found out that in India, users, well, they don't have a lot of disposable income, and right now they were not using their cell phone in order to access Facebook because data was too expensive. But at the same time, they were using internet cafes in order to go to check their Facebook once a day or so. Therefore, they created very inexpensive plans allowing users to access those services on their mobile phone for just a few rupees for 1 hour of usage. And that was revenue that was not accessible to them in the past. Now, when we're talking about the former, which is new agreements between network operators themselves, I think that we are seeing that because most of the traffic is shifting from traditional voice, circuit switch voice and circuit switch data to all IP, that the economics around interconnect is changing. And certainly we will see with VoLTE, but also with video and audio streaming, new models emerge. And right now we can see that the European Commission has changed drastically the way network operator can charge for roaming usage in voice services, and is looking attentively at data services as well. I know that in North America, between Canada and the US, for instance, most network operators have stopped charging per megabyte of usage for cross-border traffic, and are starting to look at pricing on a daily basis for a fair usage. So we're seeing a lot of different charging models that are evolving together with the fact that the traffic is changing and that those networks are evolving towards all IP.
Okay, great. Sudeep, I wanted to come back to you and ask about some related to quality of experience. Obviously video service providers, care about the content experience that their users have. I'm assuming that broadband and wireless service providers probably care about it to some extent, but I'm wondering when you're talking about content that might be coming over networks that aren't owned by the company originating the content, what can you do about quality of experience for content anywhere when they don't necessarily originate the content? They might just carry it on their networks.
Yeah, it's a very important point because previously people who were almost generating or originating the content at least were also the ones carrying it to the subscriber or the viewer, whereas now we've got kind of quite a few open items in the middle, right? So it's kind of like over the air, but 1,000 times worse in some ways, right? And what ends up happening a lot of times is you have an over-the-top service coming across the internet and then into someone's network, and the subscribers subscribe to a broadband or wireless provider and they hold them somewhat responsible for the fact that their video service that's going over the top is not really working well, right? And we've been talking to people on both sides of this about what can be done, and I think this is one of the areas where both people have have to take on some part of that ownership and do take on some part of that ownership. But one of the biggest things is they've got to be able to do is the demarcation, right? So if you're talking about someone who's only providing broadband or wireless access or service to someone, then and they have to be able to demark at that point and say, okay, here is what's coming into my network, and I'm going to then make sure that my network's not going to make it any worse than it is when it is. Than when it is coming into it. And at the same token, the people who are originating the content, they've got to make sure that they're being able to think ahead and think about all the various factors that can affect that content and service as it's going through, out of their domain, so to speak, and makes its journey all the way through potentially the open internet and then through someone else's network to that subscriber's home or tablet or mobile device, right? So there's actually ability for both to ensure that their portion of the network or service is working optimally, and both, I think, is required to be able to ensure that that viewer gets the proper or the best quality of experience possible for them.
Okay, great. We have a question about how delivery and the last mile is brokered and managed. Matt, is that something that you might be able to talk a little bit about? You mentioned the importance of the last mile.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly take a stab at it. In terms of how is it brokeraged and managed, from a brokering perspective, it's definitely up to the provider who's providing that last mile connectivity. So if you're looking at a mobile infrastructure, there's really two pieces of it, right? There's from the cell tower to the handset, which is absolutely in the hands of the wireless carrier. And then you have from the cell tower to really the first switching station, which is either in the hands of the provider, and they're definitely responsible for it. But in a lot of cases, certainly in the Americas, specifically in North America, you see a lot of backhaul from the cell site to a switching center being purchased from a third party. So if you're carrier A, you may be buying backhaul capacity from carrier B. So in some situations, this is certainly an area where we see SLAs and penalties for violations of, items like packet loss, latency, and jitter. So that's kind of how it's monitored and brokered. You have some areas where people bid certainly on that last mile connectivity. On the fixed line, I think it's definitely more of what I would call it's a more it's a little bit straighter of a line, if you will, because typically whoever you're buying the service from, whether it be an MSO or telecommunications, they're responsible for that kind of end-to-end connection. So from your house back to or your apartment, whatever the case may be, back to the switching center, and then out, into their infrastructure. So I don't know if that exactly answers it, but.
Okay, Patrick, do you want to chime in on this as well?
Sure, absolutely. I think it's important for everyone to understand that right now, when we talk about the last mile, there are a lot of different last miles, depending on whether we're talking about fixed line delivery via cable, satellite, or wireless via cellular networks. And if you're a content provider today, such as Netflix, for instance, or HBO or Facebook, well, basically, when you want to ensure quality of experience for your subscribers, what you're going to do is to try to have some control over the delivery of your content all the way and as close as possible to the last mile, as close as possible to the user consuming your content. So in fixed line networks, traditionally, content providers have been using CDNs in order to do that. The way it worked is that they're paying for peering agreement and transit agreement in order to guarantee that they get some service level agreement and to have some level of quality and speed when delivering that content to the end user. People like Netflix recently, well, over the last 2 years, have found out that to deliver high quality video services, CDN is not necessarily the the most economical or scalable way to do that. So they basically created their own CDN and their own cache, and Google has started doing the same as well in mobile networks. But what is important and interesting is that right now, although content providers are paying CDNs or creating their own CDNs for fixed line delivery, there's not an equivalent for mobile networks. So if a content provider wants to guarantee quality of service, quality of experience to a subscriber that will be streaming or watching its content in a cellular network, then we will have to come to an agreement with wireless networks. And I think that a lot of the net neutrality discussions that we're seeing today are kind of like smoke screens to basically highlight the fact that content providers are already paying CDNs. They don't want to pay an equivalent to mobile networks, but increasingly their content is transiting through mobile networks and cellular networks, and that creates a lot of tension in the industry.
Okay, great. One more audience question that I thought was interesting. Why does the conversation center around video, or why is only video important and not HD audio? Are there different KPIs for both? I know that I focused on video in part because the amount of traffic generated by video is astronomical. I'm wondering if any of our panelists have thoughts on the HD video versus HD audio.
I think it's a matter of size, I think at the end of the day, if you can manage efficiently video and HD video, then by extension you can manage efficiently audio, because those streaming mechanisms from the protocol to the codecs are essentially the same. It's not that video is more important than audio, it's just that it takes more space. And also the fact that outside of North America, audio traffic, streaming audio traffic is not as high. In North America, we have seen a growth of audio traffic over the internet with an over 50% growth over last year, amounting to close to 10% of traffic. But outside of North America, audio streaming traffic remains like in the low digit number in terms of weight in wireless networks.
All right, so one last question for, I'm sorry, did somebody else want to chime in there?
Yeah, this is Sudeep. I was just going to say that, in fact, I just responded to that question online, but I'll just say this out loud to everyone as well, that, from a distribution and transmission perspective, it is exactly as Patrick just mentioned. If you can carry the video, then the audio should be okay. But there's a lot of focus, I would say that there is a lot of focus on the audio much further upstream in that whole workflow that we talked about earlier, right? Because in that flow, what we have seen through our discussions with our customers and people out there in the media industry is that the audio workflows end up being a lot more complex because there's a lot being done to it, and then especially with multiple languages and such, and described video services as well. All of that complication ends up causing sometimes more problems on the audio side. So I think further upstream in that workflow and the value chain, there's a lot more focus placed on audio. But then in the distribution and part of it, if the video goes well, then the audio will kind of come through. So that's why the focus is on the bigger, the ones that require the bigger pipes, i.e. the video.
Okay, great. All right, so one last question to wrap it up for our panelists. And Matt, I'd like to start with you. And that is a look forward. Open up, take a look at your crystal balls, and let's think about what developments do you expect to see in the next 2 to 3 years in terms of content delivery. And Matt, give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I think, certainly coming over, down in the next couple of years, we're going to see carriers really try to push, CDNs or something like that as close to the end consumers as possible, while still keeping the content certainly in their data centers. I think what this will do is really force carriers and the CDN providers, if they're not the same, really to do a balancing act to, if you look at it, ensure that the right content is in the right place at the right time. We certainly see things where, certain events, what globally affect, CDNs and as whether it's rolling out a new video, rolling out a new software update, all these things become extremely important. And I also think that, we haven't really seen certainly the end of the innovations in this space. So how data is served and delivered to the end customer, I think will certainly evolve and change in the next couple of years. I don't know exactly how that is yet, but I'm confident that someone will have a great idea.
The million-dollar question.
Yep.
All right, Sudeep, would you like to give us your thoughts on evolutions you expect to see in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think we've got to let the current set of evolutions, settle and allow us to catch up with it really, and that's going to determine a lot of what's going to happen next. I think you are going to see, this drive towards the decoupling of that that used to be previously of a set of people who were your service provider to being able to get content a lot more widely across from even niche content that was previously not that easy to get to, right? And that will be available more and more. But from a technology perspective, I think we're going to see that getting driven more and more to where the ability for consumers to consume that content becomes all the more easier.
Okay, Patrick, your thoughts looking forward?
Well, I think that it's going to get worse before it gets better in terms of the quality of experience. Today, if we're looking at video content, it is substantially good online when we're watching it over fixed broadband, but when we're looking at mobile broadband and wireless networks, it's pretty bad in the sense that nearly 1/3 of video streams stutter or buffer for more than 10% of their duration. One video out of 5 doesn't even start when you click on it. So there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that in mobile networks, content can be consumed with a high quality of experience. And I think that we're going to see network operators and content providers on one end collaborate more, but also at the same time compete more. From a competition standpoint, we will see more and more content providers encrypt their content, and I predict that about 30% of traffic on the internet will be encrypted over the next couple of years. And at the same time, we will see also a more integrated solution between carriers and content providers that will have specific deals where a user will be able to subscribe to Netflix or to Facebook for their wireless usage, and they will have some quality of service that will be dedicated or at least guaranteed to provide a better user experience.
Okay, great. I'd like to thank our panelists. We had Patrick Lopez of Core Analysis, Sudeep Bose of Tektronix, and Matt Goldberg of Sev1. Gentlemen, thank you so much. The slides for this webinar will be available afterwards, and it is going to be archived on rcrwireless.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.